download our Revise It Right revision app for hundreds of videos, quizzes, exam questions, tutor support and so much more. This video is about the heart. So here we have the heart. Now remember, the heart is an organ, which means it is made up of different tissues working together. And we all know really the heart is a very, very important organ, and its role really is in pumping blood around the body in the circulatory system to deliver lots and lots of different substances that are needed around the body. So here we have a diagram of the heart in front of us, and there's quite a lot that we have to remember with the heart, and there's quite a lot of labelling, but once I've gone through it, I'm hoping it should make it a lot easier for you. Now if you are ever given a diagram like this of the heart and are asked to label it, then really the first job that you need to do is you first need to identify which is the left and which is the right, because as you're looking down on your screen right now, what is to your left is not actually the left, and what is to your right is not actually the right. They're flipped. So if you look down and you're looking to your left, that is actually the right side, and if you're looking to your right, that is actually the left side. Okay, and a better way maybe to remember this is to really look at the thickness of this wall here, and you can see that this side has a much thicker wall to this side. The side with the thicker wall is the left, so I'm going to label that here, and the side with the thinner wall is the right. Okay, now why is that? Well, that is because the left has to pump blood around the whole body, whereas the right only has to pump blood to the lungs. And now the lungs away from the heart is not that far of a distance, so it doesn't need as big as a push that the left needs when it's pumping blood around the whole body. So it needs a big thick wall to cope with that high pressure of blood that it needs to pump, really, really high pressure. So that's why the left is thicker than the right. So that's two ways there you can really identify the left and the right. So make sure you do that first, because then that helps you really label everything else. Okay, so the heart is made up of 4 chambers. So you've got the top chambers, which are here and here. These are the top 2 chambers, and then you've got the bottom chambers, which you can see here and here, and they're actually separated by heart valves, which I've just drawn on there. So you've got the 2 at the top and the 2 at the bottom. Okay, now the 2 top chambers, so this one and this one, are called atrium. Okay, now because this atrium here is on the left, we call it the left atrium, and because this atrium here is on the right, we call it the right atrium. So the 2 chambers at the top, we've got our left atrium and we've got our right atrium. Now the 2 chambers at the bottom are called our ventricles, and again this chamber here is on the left, so we call it the left ventricle, and this one here is on the right, so we call it the right ventricle. Okay, so we've got our left and right atrium at the top and our left and right ventricles at the bottom. So there are 4 chambers that we need to remember. As well as that, you'll see 4 different blood vessels coming into or out of the heart that we really also need to be able to remember. Okay, you'll remember from our previous video, if you've watched it, if not please go and watch it, on blood vessels, that arteries, they take blood away from the heart, and veins take blood into the heart. You'll remember me saying that artery begins with the letter A, and so does away, and vein has in it, and it takes it into the heart. So that's how you can remember that. Now why that's important is because it means that this blood vessel here is going away from the heart, so that must be an artery, and this blood vessel here is also going away from the heart, so that must be an artery as well. So these 2 are arteries, whereas these going in are vein, and this one going in here is also a vein. So that's one way to easily identify. If you don't have the arrow showing, then you can remember that the veins are connected to the atrium, they go into the atrium, and the arteries come away from the ventricles. So that's how you can remember if you don't have the arrows to help. But let's now label these. So we'll start on the left, and we'll start with the artery. So we're starting here. Now this artery is called, well, we can call it the main artery, but its name is the aorta. Okay, now it starts with a letter A to help you remember that that's an artery. So that's an aorta. Now the job of the aorta is to take blood out of the left side of the heart around the body. And we'll come to that in a second. We'll start with this artery now, this other artery. Now this one is called the pulmonary artery. Now anything to do with pulmonary, when we start using the word pulmonary, we're talking about, we know it's something to do with the lungs. So the pulmonary artery takes blood away from the heart to the lungs. And again, we'll get to that in a second. So that's now labelled the two veins. We've got this one on the left side here. This actually receives blood from the lungs. So remember I said that when anything's to do with the lungs, it's called pulmonary. So that is pulmonary, and it's a vein, so the pulmonary vein. And going to our right side vein, which is over here, that brings in blood back from the body. And we call this the vena cava. Okay, so it may be a good idea, there's lots to remember here, maybe a good idea for you to screenshot this if you would like to. Of course you don't have to, but lots to remember here. So let's now talk about blood flow then, because we've labelled our heart. Let's talk about blood flow. Now it is a circuit, or it's actually a double circuit, but I'll get to that in a second, which means that really you can start anywhere on the journey. So we're going to start with the aorta, which is here. So the aorta, the blood comes out of the aorta, and as I said, it delivers blood to the body. Okay, this is oxygenated blood, as it contains oxygen. That's what we mean by oxygenated blood. It contains oxygen. So it delivers that oxygen around the body for the cells to use it for respiration. Okay, so on its way back, it's used that oxygen. Therefore the blood no longer has much oxygen in it because it's given it to the body cells. So on the way back, it goes back into the body through the vena cava, which is here, but this here is deoxygenated blood. It doesn't contain much oxygen as it's been used around the body. So really, the job therefore in that blood needs to become oxygenated again. It needs to get more oxygen. So where's it going to go to do that? Well, it needs to go to the lungs. So what happens is it comes through the vena cava into the right atrium, down into the right ventricle, then up, out through the pulmonary artery. Now remember I said pulmonary artery is something to the lungs. So here, the blood is going from the pulmonary artery to the lungs. And again, this is deoxygenated blood because it's not been to the lungs yet. So it doesn't contain the oxygen. So at this point here, it's deoxygenated. And then it goes to the lungs, which is where it collects its oxygen. Remember, through that gas exchange. If you haven't watched that lungs video, then go back and watch it. In the alveoli, oxygen is given to the blood and carbon dioxide is taken out. That happens in the lungs. So then it needs to go back to the heart to be pumped around the body again. So from the lungs, it goes into the pulmonary vein. Okay, well this time it's oxygenated blood. It's now been to the lungs and it's gotten its oxygen. So this is now oxygenated blood. And it goes into the pulmonary vein, into the left atrium, down into the left ventricle, and then up out again through the aorta and to the body, and it continues. And that is that. Okay. Now you can see here, I'll just leave that on for you a second just to appreciate it, but that there is how our blood works, our circulatory system works at pumping blood around the body. Okay, now if you look here, there are two circuits to this route. There's one to the heart to the body and back. That is one complete circuit, and then one from the heart to the lungs and back. So heart, lungs and back. That's two circuits. Okay, so one circuit here and two circuits here.
Remember to download our Revise It Right revision app, watch over 700 videos, answer 4,000 plus quiz questions, over 1,000 flashcards, 1,000 exam questions, worksheets, forums, and get help from qualified teachers and so much more. The link is in the description.
Humans have a double circulatory system, which is essentially what I've just shown you there. Okay, heart, lungs, back, heart, body, back. Two distinct circuits, two distinct
loops. Okay, and that's important. And you need to be aware and need to remember that humans have a double circulatory system, and that's what this means, that there are two circuits of blood, one to the heart and lungs and back, one to the heart, to the body and back. Okay, the reason really we have this is to make it more efficient. Okay, we have quite a large organism, and therefore we need to develop these efficient ways of getting oxygen around the body, and this is a much more efficient way to do it. If we had to pump blood from the heart to the lungs and then to the body and then back to the heart, that would be much slower, because by the time that the blood had been to the lungs, it would have lost some pressure, and then it would be getting around the body at really low pressure, so it would be going much slower. So the reason it can go back to the heart is to get another big pump to go all around the body, to travel at quite a high pressure, so it goes around quicker, so it's much more efficient. So just on from that, I just want to very quickly then summarise the flow of blood. I did it on this diagram here, but obviously that maybe doesn't make much sense to you, so let's just break that down. We can start anywhere on our journey, but I'm going to start at the aorta again just to keep things the same. Okay, so from the aorta, you'll remember that the blood goes to the body. Okay, now I know, that's all the body, that's every part, that's every organ, that's all the cells in our body. It needs to get around all of them. Okay, then once it's done on its route there, it goes back to the heart. You'll remember via the vena cava. Okay, and it enters the vena cava and goes into the right atrium. It goes into the right atrium and down into our right ventricle. And from the right ventricle, it goes out of the heart via the pulmonary artery, of where it goes to the lungs to collect its oxygen, and it goes back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. And this is of course to the left side, where it first goes into the left atrium and then into the left ventricle, and then of course out of the aorta, where it goes to the body, the vena cava, the right atrium, and so on, and it repeats, and it's a whole circuit, and it goes again. Well, it's two circuits, you'll remember, but that just repeats and repeats and repeats. In terms of an exam question, they could really ask you to start from anywhere. They could ask you to start from the vena cava or the pulmonary artery, but just be aware that the loop still goes on. If you were to start at the pulmonary artery, you'd then go to the lungs, to the pulmonary vein, left atrium, and so on. So the heart has a natural pacemaker. Okay, so our resting heart rate is actually controlled by a group of cells that we find in the top of the right atrium, so around here. Okay, so that is a group of cells that act as a pacemaker. So what that means is they control our resting heartbeat. Okay, you don't have to know too much about the ins and outs of how a pacemaker works. You just have to be aware that the pacemaker is found in the right atrium and it controls our heartbeat. Okay, what you also need to know is that an artificial pacemaker, is used with a faulty pacemaker. So if someone has a faulty pacemaker, i.e. an irregular heartbeat, so if they have a condition that is an irregular heartbeat, they will need an artificial pacemaker, which is a little device that's implanted under the skin and has a wire going to the heart, and it produces an electric current to keep the heart beating regularly. Okay, so that essentially acts as a pacemaker to control the heartbeat through a little device. And remember, the pacemaker, the natural pacemaker, is found in the right atrium. So what I want you to do now is really have a go at these questions. So if you can pause the video for me and we'll go through the answers at the end. So pause the video now. Okay, so let's go through the answers to these questions. First of all, what is the name of the blood vessel that supplies the heart with oxygen? Okay, so that actually is the coronary artery. And we will look at that in a future video. You may have remembered that from school, so well done if you did, but we'll look at that one in a future video. Number 2, what is the name given to the top chambers of the heart? Well, we've got the left and right atrium. Okay, so the left atrium and the right atrium. What blood vessel supplies the left atrium with blood? So the left atrium, so we know that the left atrium, it comes from the lungs, so therefore that must be the pulmonary vein. So when we're talking about supplying the left atrium, we're talking about it coming into the heart, so it's the pulmonary vein. What blood vessel supplies the right atrium with blood? Well, that's coming from the body, and therefore it's the vena cava. What type of blood is found in the right ventricle? Well, from the right ventricle, the blood has just come from the body, therefore it doesn't have the oxygen because it's given the oxygen to the body, so that is deoxygenated blood. And finally, why does the left ventricle have thick muscular walls really compared to the right? Well, that is because it's got to pump blood around the whole body. So it needs to do this at high pressure, and therefore the thick muscular walls protect the heart when pumping at a really high pressure. So we have now hopefully learnt about the heart. We've learnt about its structure, which is here, and there's a lot to remember there, but we've learnt about the structure and how to label it. We've learnt that we have a double circulatory system, and we've also learnt the flow of blood around the body. And of course about very briefly about the natural pacemaker and the artificial pacemaker. So if you completely understand this, and that's great, you can move on to the quiz to really embed and test yourself, and the exam questions. If you're really struggling with anything in this video, then please contact one of our tutors and they will be happy to help.